and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have the launch of my SCASL project for 2024. A little bit of background for those who haven't seen previous years. SCASL stands for South Carolina Association of School Librarians. Most states have some sort of association like this, and a lot of them, I haven't looked through every single state, but a lot of them do these sorts of awards where the functions vary a little bit. But most of them are structured somewhat similar to how South Carolina does that. What South Carolina does is they have a member committee. I don't know how that committee is selected. These people work as librarians in various schools across the state. They read a lot of books from a particular window of publication, and they make a long list. That long list is then given to all media specialists, all librarians across the state. And there are 4 total categories. There's picture book, there's children's, junior books, which are middle grade, and young adult. Once that list is given in the upcoming school year, those students in those schools have the opportunity to read a selection of those books. The number varies based on the level. I think for young adult, you have to read at least 3 of the books, and then you can get to vote on it as a student. Adults do not vote on who is the winner of these different awards. Every year since I have found out about this, I have read the middle grade list. I started 2 years after I first found out about this list, adding on young adult as well. So I think this makes this the 6th year that I have been reading through this list. And the reason that I wanted to read through all the books on these lists is because I wanted to expand my knowledge of the books available at these levels, at the middle grade, at the young adult level, because especially for middle grade, there's just not a lot of resources out there for the average layperson, the average teacher to get their hands on to recommend to their students. And that has done wonders for my sampling of the availability at this age group. That being said, in recent years, there's been a lot to do with books and book banning from a certain sector of the political spectrum, and it has started to grow wider and wider. In my opinion, throw a taint sort of on librarians and what they do and how they make books available. I'm not going to get into the politics of this. The reason that I bring this up, though, is last year the list seemed very inadequate in a lot of different spaces. It seemed fine-ish, and I was going to do an analysis overall, especially like before I read all the books and then after. But if you've watched any of my other previous videos, you will know that I sort of lost interest in doing this award until a certain thing happened. And that was when the current superintendent of education of my state, who is not qualified to hold that position, decided to separate from the SCASL. Now, SCASL is not a government body, but the Department of Education in my state had worked very closely with them. And this person, who has spoken at Moms for Liberty events in the past, decided to separate from them and basically malign them in ways that were not accurate, saying basically that they were trying to indoctrinate children. She didn't use those sorts of words, but it came very close. So that reignited my interest in the award. I didn't end up doing the same comprehensive study on the books, on analysis of the books that I had intended sort of at the beginning, but it did get me really interested in this going forward, especially this year. Now, I am filming this on President's Day in February. I have known about the list since January, which was very unusual to me. I remember last year looking for when it was going to be released and not seeing the list until they held their conference, their annual conference, which is in March. And that's what I expected. Well, back in January, I had to return an old computer because they did refresh on the computers at my school. So I had to take it down to the library. And when I went down there, I was looking at this cart that they had behind the counter, and I saw my #1 fantasy book from last year, which is Rust in the Root by Justina Ireland. And I got super excited about this. And they mentioned it was the SCASL books. Of course, I nerded out over this and started looking at all of the books on the cart. And it turns out I have read 8 of these books. Last year there was only 1 from both lists. Only 1 total out of the 40 that I had read before. This year there's 9 of my 2 lists, but I'll get into an analysis in a little bit. I got super excited about all the books on the cart though, because there were so many books that I had read that were 4 stars, 4.5 stars, and 5 stars. Some absolutely amazing books already on the list for this year. So excited about it. Obviously, when I got back up to my classroom, I had to print off the list and start analyzing it. But before I talk about some of that analysis, I'm going to show you all of the books that are on the list. So I'm going to start by going over the young adult list. Of the 20 books, only 1 was not available to me through my local library. So I'm going to start with the books that I have read before, and that I own. That is Rust in the Root by Justina Ireland, The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman, The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd Webber, Belladonna by Adeline Grace, All My Rage by Sabatir, I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. Those are all the ones that I own. One other one that I have read but do not own is Victory Stand by Tommy Smith, Derek Barnes, and Dawood Anyawibli. I probably really butchered that. But this is one that I've read, got it as an arc, but do not own. These are the other books of the list that I am going to read. Of these, the ones that I haven't read on the list, that's a total of 12. I don't have one of them here because I don't have access to it. There's another one that I'll mention at the end that I am not going to read. And I'll get into my reasoning for that when I get there. Here are the other books. Dead Flip by Sarah Farizan, Daughters of a Dead Empire by Carolyn Tara O'Neill, Lawless Spaces by Corey Ann Haydu, Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds, artwork by Jason Griffin, The Do-Over by Lynn Painter, Star Child, a biographical constellation of Octavia Butler by E.B. Zaboy, The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes, The Life and Crimes of Hoodie Rosen by Isaac Bloom, Overground Railroad, The Green Book and the Roots of Black Travel in America by Candace Taylor. The one that I was not able to access is Spells for Lost Things by Jenna Evans Welch, an author I've read from before. And then the one that I am not going to read is The Getaway by Lamar Giles. Now I will briefly mention why I am not going to read this one when I talk about the genre breakdown and other diversity statistics in just a moment. That brings me to the middle grade list. Interestingly enough, there are 4 other books that I have read on any of these lists, but they're not included in middle grade. The reason that I read them though is because they are classified as middle grade and they were on the last Goodreads Choice Awards for middle grade. Those 4 are Finally Seen by Kelly Yang, The Kid is in 6th grade, which is middle school, The Girl in White by Lindsay Curry, A Rover's Story by Jasmine Warga, and Witchlings by Claribel Ortega. All of those are on the children's book list, but not the middle grade list. Interestingly enough, I will refer to this now and may refer back to it when I'm talking about statistics, but the diversity statistics would have been much improved had at least 3 of these 4 books been included on the middle grade list. Speaking of that middle grade list, I do not have the whole list here. I have 13 of the books, but not the other 7 because they are not available. 7 out of the 20 books are not available at my local library. These children are the ones most likely to not be able to access these books on their own. It's not a guarantee that a parent is going to go out and purchase these books for them. Most children in any state, much less my state, the way that they have access to books is through the library. The way that I accessed books as a child was through the library. My mom could not afford to purchase books for me. I should say, she could not afford to purchase a lot of books for me, especially the number of books that I read and was interested in. I get to this every time. If one of the biggest libraries in the state does not have access to these books, that is a problem. Because That's not a guarantee that schools are going to have access to these books. That's not a guarantee that even when librarians, school librarians get a hold of this list and are trying to provide these books for their students, that's not a guarantee that they're going to have money to purchase these books. That gets into a whole other mess that I'm not going to get into. So let me talk about the books that are actually on the middle grade list. One book that I own, and then the 12 that I was able to get from the library. I will, if I'm able to, I forgot to go through and mark the ones that I was not able to get a hold of, but if I remember, I'll try to find those on this list. The one that I do own, and I'm so thrilled that it's on this list, is Rain Rising by Courtney Comrie. I talked about this last year. This book was phenomenal. It was a gut punch. It was heart-wrenching. I'm so glad it's on this list. The ones that I was able to get from my library: Ellen Outside the Lines by A.J. Sass, Meet Me Halfway by Annika Farhado, Yonder by Allie Standish, The Whispering Fog by Landra Jennings, A Song Called Home by Sarah Zarr, Attack of the Black Rectangles by A.S. King, Blackbird Blue Road by Sophia Pasternak, A Duet for Home by Karina Glaser, The Last Mapmaker by Christina Suntervat, Hummingbird by Natalie Lloyd, and Camp Famous by Jennifer Bletcher. I have the list right here. The ones that I was not able to access from my library: The Bluest Sky by Christina Gonzalez, Dream Annie Dream by Waka Brown, Playing Through the Turnaround by Melissa Larson, Sweet and Sour by Debbie Florence, Those Kids from Fawn Creek by Erin and Sharada Kelly, Where the Sky Lives by Margaret Dalloway, and We Were the Fire, Birmingham 1963 by Sheila Moses. The next thing that I want to talk about are the statistics. I went through and analyzed the list for two different things: diversity rep that I could tell without reading the book, as well as genre breakdowns. So for young adult, these are the most obvious representations. Either I've read the book and I know that the representation is there, or it was mentioned in the synopsis. So we have 5 books with African American rep, 2 books with Latina rep, 2 books with Asian Pacific Islander rep, 1 book with other, and in this case it was Jewish rep, 4 books with LGBTQ+, and the remaining 9 did not have any noticeable rep in the synopsis. Now for middle grade, this was the diversity rep that was most obvious when first looking at these books. We have 3 African American, 2 Latina, 3 Asian and Pacific Islanders, 1 other, which is a physical disability, the main character is in a wheelchair, and 1 neurodivergent. That means that there were 8 books of middle grade that did not have any discernible rep. Is that good? Is that bad? As far as young adult goes, it is a marked improvement on last year. There were so many basic white people in last year's books. So many. The ones that I enjoyed were not those. When I looked at this list, and a lot of the books on the YA list, it definitely seemed like the librarians who made the selections for this list after our superintendent of education made that BS statement about why she can't support this organization of school librarians. It just seemed to me like these librarians were like, you know what? We're going to go through and we're going to make sure that there are a lot of different representations, both with diversity and with genres. I'll get to that one in a moment. That was so clear to me. And I am so thrilled that so many of these are on here. There's so many amazing books on this list. I will say, I kind of wonder if I've read all of the standouts already. I'm hoping there's still going to be some really good ones in that pile that I haven't read yet. As far as middle grade goes, it doesn't feel like there's the same amount of rep. Although I did mark 9 young adult as not having any obvious rep without having read those books, and 8 for middle grade, which is basically the same. It just seems like to me for middle grade, it doesn't seem as diverse. And I think just looking at the statistics, part of the reason that I may feel that way is the lack of diversity when it comes to genre representation. So let me get into that next before I talk a little bit more about it. For young adult, there are 6 different genres represented. We have 5 contemporary or realistic fiction. We have 4 nonfiction, 2 historical, 4 fantasy, 2 horror, and 3 other. 2 of the other are romance And one is a non-conventional style. It is the Jason Reynolds book, which is a mix of poetry and art. I'm really looking forward to that one. This is where that other book that I alluded to before that I'm not going to read in the young adult list. That book is The Getaway. I knew when looking at the cover, this is a horror genre, and I also looked at some of the reviews, and horror is not my genre. I do not enjoy reading it at all, and some of the things mentioned in the review just turn me off completely. I'm like, you know what? I am not going to put myself through that. I'm not going to read it. I know that I won't enjoy it and that I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. So that is why I'm making the decision to not read that book. I think that is the first time I've ever consciously chosen not to read a particular book from the list. There have been a few other years where I have missed a book and found out later, but I'm making the conscious decision to not read that book. Then we get to genre-wise for middle grade. And there are only 3 genres represented. Only 3. The numbers are 3 in fantasy, 3 in historical, and 14 in contemporary. I am not necessarily a huge contemporary fan. And at first I was thinking, this is a big problem. Then I started thinking about why and analyzing the age range of those particular children. Now, I, as a middle school aged child, was unusual. I read Lord of the Rings in 7th grade at this age. I know that there are a lot that enjoy that, but a lot of kids at the middle school level are not necessarily capable of thinking abstractly. A lot of them are still thinking concretely. That's just how their brains are wired. Development at that level, you have to take that into account to help teach them, to help them learn. And so I wonder if that's why there's less of the fantastical, less of the pulling out of different types of genres, because a lot of them are not necessarily able to think at that level. At the same time, though, I can think of exceptions to all of it. And so I wish there was more diversity in the types of genres. And I think for me, the fact that we have so many contemporary books, and most of those contemporary books are also the ones that don't have any obvious representation, I think that's the problem for me. Because when I think about the school where I first started teaching, where I first started hearing about this list, I remember when I was like, you know what, I have this brilliant idea for how I'm going to decorate my classrooms. I'm going to print out book covers. So I started looking through, searching through like classic lit and pulling up all these books. And before I started making these posters, I went and I looked at them and I'm like, wait a second, there's a lot of white guys on here. There's a lot of white people on these. And the demographics at that time was over 60% Latina, another third African American. They're not going to look at those posters and see themselves represented. And I thought, you know what? I can't have that. And so I made a purposeful turn to looking for books, well-written books of quality that had that representation. And so that is my biggest issue with the lack of genre and other diverse representation in the middle grade list. And it just makes me wonder as to the sampling of books that these librarians had available for them. I know that there were several that were phenomenal and quite frankly should be on this list. When you think about the 3 of the books that are on the children's list that I think should be on the middle grade list, that would amp up the diversity even more. You have Witchlings by Claribel Ortega, that would be the Latina rep. You have Finally Seen by Kelly Yang, that would be AAPI rep. And you have a Rover Story with Jasmine Warga. The main character is a robot, but one of the characters working on Rover is Muslim, and I forget which country they are from, but that's an additional AAPI rep right there. I want more diversity. Is this a bad selection looking at it from the outset? I don't think so. Especially for a young adult, I think it's an excellent selection. We'll see when I get into the books that I haven't read yet, but I think that the list is definitely improving. The areas where I want it to improve, I don't know necessarily that it's the list's fault, like the availability of certain books at the library. I don't think that's SCASL's fault. That brings me to how am I going to undertake this project this year? I am not going to spread it out like I did last year. I think that just became too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the months of May and June to read all of the books that I haven't yet read. And I'm going to split up the analysis that I have of those books into probably 4 different videos. I might do 6, but probably 4. So the first of those videos is going to have all of the books that I have already read before, all of the young adult books. I also think I'm going to keep it separated between young adult and middle grade, but that's my plan going forward on how I'm going to evaluate these. When it comes to the final wrap-up video, I'm going to show my rankings and I'm going to talk about my overall thoughts about the quality of these lists and whether or not I would put any of them in my classroom and maybe my ideas for how to make these lists even better. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.